I now recognize Dr. McCormick from Georgia for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I can't speak to everybody's experiences during this pandemic, but I can only speak to my own, specifically as an emergency medicine physician who served during the entire pandemic, somebody who was censored, somebody who was censored on multiple platforms for having my own opinion in medicine as a professional, and I consider myself an expert since I've treated thousands of COVID patients and I've studied the literature, studied the science. Nonetheless, somebody on the other side of the universe of foreign application have been able to censor me, and I thought that was very unfair. I want to talk about the constitutionality of that a little bit, and since you guys are the experts, you'll be able to give me insight onto that. It's interesting, by the way, I would also note that almost everything that I said that I was censored for has turned out to be true, even by the admission of people that we've interviewed during these hearings. So I just want to add that as an interesting caveat of what we're censored for, because it turns out that opinions are necessary by medical professionals in order to determine what's true as we debate the science, if you will. With that said, specifically in big tech companies and constitutionality and protected speech, Mr. Bailey, would you mind elaborating on some of the specific findings so far from the Missouri versus Biden case that would just apply to the constitutionality of what I just addressed?
Absolutely. And first, let me say that there are numerous examples where President Biden himself, Vice President Kamala Harris, other officials with the White House, to include former Press Secretary Jen Psaki, have explicitly called for the repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is a boon to social media corporations, an enormous financial benefit to these corporations if the corporations don't enhance their censorship policies. Then agents acting on behalf of the federal government go to social media and make more specific targeted requests of censorship. It is a relationship of coercion and collusion. It's not big tech acting on their own. That would be bad enough. But in this instance, as we've demonstrated through more than 1,400 numbered paragraphs of specific allegations backed up by evidence and documents that are available in our lawsuit, it's targeted, it's specific, and it's at the behest of the federal government. And as Rob Flaherty, the Director of Digital Communications at the White House, opined, it goes all the way to the very top of the White House. It's grown so far that they need to establish additional bureaucratic structure to manage it. But the remedy for disfavored speech in this nation has always been counter speech, as you point out, not government censorship. In fact, government censorship is counterproductive to the public's pursuit of truth. The founders knew that. That's why they included it as the very first amendment in the United States Constitution. And I would also point out, as I've stated, that it's in times of crisis and emergency when we must be most vigilant in protecting those sacred and foundational rights.
Thank you for your testimony. I couldn't agree with you more wholeheartedly, especially once again seeing how unfair and biased the censorship has been as far as my experience has gone, especially since the evolution of this, the opinions and the science throughout history has shown that a lot of times the dissenting opinion ends up being the truth. As I mentioned before, when I was censored about things that sometimes turned out to be true, can you also elaborate on the constitutionality of the forced mandates of masks by federal, state, and local governments, Mr. Bailey?
Absolutely. Free speech is about not only speaking, but acting in a certain way as well. And we've got to be vigilant in protecting that. And when we see forced mask mandates that aren't backed up by science or evidence, when we see the suppression of conversations about the effectiveness of masks, those undermine the rule of law and they reduce the credibility of the outcome of the conversation because it's an unfair debate. It's a one-sided debate. And when the government uses its heavy hand to suppress that speech, people cease to trust the outcomes, and it undermines the rule of law and faith and confidence in the government.
So you would consider it unconstitutional?
In many instances. I would need more facts and specifics.
Yeah. And specifically, I'd like to point out that maybe it has some constitutionality, but in the same sense that this is why it's very important that we pick the right government officials that actually lay down these laws and guidelines. That's why elections matter. Beginning in 2000, I'm almost out of time, so I'll have to submit my last question online because I want to respect the time for the hearing. Thank you. With that, I yield.